Okay, should be all set, Alex.
Okay, hi everybody, welcome. Welcome to today's webinar in celebration of National Distance Learning Week. I'm Alexandra Pickett and I'm the Director of Online Teaching for SUNY Online, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker to you. So today's presentation is going to be given by Jessica Kruger from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Jessica is a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior at the University at Buffalo. She also serves as the Director of Teaching Innovation and Excellence within the School of Public Health and Health Professions at UB. Welcome all. Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Really excited to talk about this topic today as it's kind of new, emerging, and I think it's always challenging when we get some new initiatives to really think about how to implement some of these strategies. So what I'm going to go through is just talk a little bit about kind of the Oscar changes, and then we're going to really move into strategies and some tips and tricks of how you can support faculty and others who are changing courses or revising courses based on these standards. So here are our objectives today. Any good presentation always has to start with objectives, so I feel obligated to put them in all the time, but what I really hope that you take away are some of these examples, and we're going to have some conversation about what you're doing and maybe some things that you might want to bounce around with others on the call. So we've probably seen this graphic. I think it's a really nice way to really think about some changes and some ways to interact in our classes. And when I think of correspondence education, I really think of some of the Coursera courses, right? You're in it, maybe you're not interacting with anyone, but you kind of go through the motions. This is also similar to if you were like me taking an early online education course in the early 2000s or so. There was a lot of correspondence education. We didn't kind of move through this dial. Video lectures became incredibly popular over COVID and emergency online education. And while they have a place, right, we all can take away that video lectures alone is not a good online course. Moving up the dial, I'm going to talk a little bit about some weekly announcements and some different ways to do that. And then, of course, feedback. This is something as faculty can be challenging and cumbersome to really give. And so sometimes we see people just kind of landing here, grading assignments without feedback, or providing feedback that maybe isn't quite as interactive as it could be, especially in an online course when you're trying to create presence and support connection. Now, here's the happier smiles, right? Thinking about ways to create some announcements, some video lectures, and I'm going to bring up a new topic called Bikronus model of interaction and how this might help with some of these instructor-initiated discussions and even maybe some ideas for office hours. So that's kind of an overview of how we're going to go through this content. So as of July 1st, 2021, we have these guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, and basically that we need to have instructor-initiated interaction, and that the instructor really needs to be central in this to communicate with the students and keep them up to date, along with that substantive. So what are the activities? How are you doing them? What modality are you utilizing? And I think one of my favorite components of this is predictability, right? Students like that predictability and the scheduling of content released in online courses, and somewhat predictable format of every Tuesday you do this, every Thursday you do that, and you expect to get communications from an instructor multiple times a week. So what is substantive interaction that we're talking about today? This is straight from the website that SUNY has on the Oscar rubric and this content: direct interaction between the learner and the instructor. And this can focus on assessing and providing feedback, which we've kind of discussed, providing information, facilitating group discussion, and I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion on how do we make discussion boards a little bit better, and other instructional activities. So how are we getting things approved? What are the activities in which we're going through our review process? So a lot to think about as we're making these changes in an online course, moving from that Coursera model into a more interactive approach. Okay, here's the fun part. How do we really achieve this? When the rubber meets the road, right, we can read things that we have to do day in after day out, but how can we put this into practice? And so I think having a weekly overview and recap is really key to help students get that regular feedback in which they're looking for, that regular interaction. So in my courses, they get an announcement every Monday and every Friday. And I picked Monday and Friday just because it feels like the beginning and the end of the week. Of course, you could choose your own days depending on how your course runs. But what's important is what is in these announcements. And we use UB Learns or Blackboard as our LMS system. So it's very easy to create an announcement, and I send those via email. I think it's important because students may get that trigger of, yes, something has been put on the LMS system, but how often are they going to look at it? Now, that of course assumes that our students read their emails, which may not be the case in every situation, but at least we know it's getting to them in multiple streams. In my announcements, I like to talk about what's going on. So what are we going to cover this week? What is exciting about this? And why is that important for you to learn? In my case, I teach public health students. So I always want to relate this to what they're going to do in their job, in their field, as a public health practitioner. I cover any sort of assessment. So talking about that we might have a discussion board, or they're going to turn in a budget, or they're going to create a plan that week. And I always invite questions, especially at the beginning of the course, as you're trying to create connection with students and allowing that collaborative environment to grow. I think it's always nice to end every announcement with, and if you have questions, please reach out. Also, depending on what week we are in the semester, obviously not week one, but if we're talking about a complicated topic and I'm getting a lot of questions, I'll do any clarifying questions from the previous week in the next week's announcement. So for example, my one class, we just talked about budgets. Budgets are hard. If you have to make a budget and understand a budget, that can be really challenging. And so in some of their discussion board questions, there were some content that wasn't completely clarified by their colleagues. And so in my announcement, I picked out some questions, I wrote the answers so that I knew everyone was getting that same information, even if they didn't go back to the discussion board. So that's kind of the start of the week, to get them jazzed about what's going on, understanding what they need to do. Now, Fridays are my recap day. And I always restate the topic because maybe they haven't looked at the materials yet. I always note any sort of progress that is being made in the assessments. And so my courses sometimes have discussion boards, sometimes they have other posts that they're making or something that they're creating. And so that kind of looks like, I really appreciate everyone who got on and asked some really interesting questions so far this week. Encouragement this semester has been challenging for all of us. And so providing encouraging messages, I think, is really important. And it also builds that environment that you want to create that's inclusive and supportive. And of course, any reminders of due dates. So what does this look like? This was actually one thing that I sent out this week. So I kind of acknowledge what's going on in life, the time change, we're all struggling. And they're working on elevator pitches in my class. Being stuck in an elevator with someone, you got to communicate to future employers. So that's why they need to know this. And then what they're going to do. And then when that is actually due this week. So that's kind of an example of an overview. Recap looks very similar. And this was from a different week. We're talking about translational sciences. Great seeing their post on a discussion board. They did a nice job and making sure that they did post by the end of the day. Then any sort of due dates. I like to use bold font just to make things stand out. Everyone has a little bit of a different take on how they make their content stand out. Again, you see any reach out for questions, and I am an overuser of explanation points, so my announcements are always very exciting. So that's a kind of an overview of beginning, end of the week. But what about assignments? What about grading and giving feedback? So feedback takes a lot of time. As a faculty member, it can be very easy to just say 10 points, good job. We know that's not helpful, right? And we know that they really need more feedback than just the positive, what they can improve on. And so rubrics are a great way to give feedback. If you have a very specific rubric, that can provide what they've done well and what they maybe need to change to reach a higher level of a grade or understanding of that content. We've all heard of the sandwich method. Good, bad, good. And I like that as a way to give written feedback of, I really appreciate the effort that you put into this assignment, yet you missed a few points and I'd like you to clarify this more. But, you also did this in a nice way. And so that can be a way to structure some feedback. I teach really large classes and feedback can be tough, especially written feedback. I myself am a terrible speller and our LMS system does not always highlight when you've spelled something wrong. You actually have to go an extra step and choose spell check. So for me, I actually prefer giving my students video feedback. And what that kind of looks like is we have a program called Panopto. It allows us to do screen recording. I pull up their paper and I go through and talk about that paper as if they were sitting right next to me. Add this comma. Oh, great point. Oh, think about adding a citation. Perhaps change this content or move something around. Now, the benefit of this, especially in an online course that may be asynchronous, you can really put emotions into it. Students get to know you versus reading that comment of, what did you mean, right? Some people could take that as very negative. Whereas if I say, well, what did you mean by that, right? Or that's really great. How can we work towards something different? You can hear the emotion and they get to know you a little bit more, even in an asynchronous course. And some LMS systems actually have built-in feedback, video or audio. In my profession, we assign a lot of papers. And so it's nice to be able to give them that visual to see and give them that video in which they can make those changes. For me, this is faster. Even if I have large classes, sit down, doing 10 at a time until I get through that course. If you have graders, it's also a great way to get them involved, to have them record and practice their oral communication skills. So some things to think about if you're interested in trying a different method of feedback. So we always hear about office hours. Well, most students don't know what office hours are for. They think that's where you just come to have a question. But office hours, I would say, are much more than that. That's a great time to interact, get to know students, have a discussion, and even support them, especially in an online environment. So my office hours are called virtual student hours. And I really want to explain to students at the beginning of the course what these are, what they're for, and why they should actually come and say hi to me. So when I'm teaching them about student hours, I really emphasize the point of connection, especially in an asynchronous course. I want to get to know you because maybe you're going to need a letter of recommendation when you go to grad school or get a job. It's always nice to pop in and get some clarification. So if I didn't write instructions very well, I want you to tell me. I want to be there to support you and help your understanding. I want to be able to discuss content with you. So if you maybe think of a different way in which I could present content, or recently, I am terrible at estimating how long it takes for students to read a paper. And in all of my courses, I say, read this paper, bracket 10 minutes. I had a student say, it takes me at least 30 to read those papers. I was like, great, I really appreciate that feedback. Like, tell me how I can better exhibit that to you so that you understand how much time this module is going to take you. And of course, in these very challenging times in which we're all going through, we're still living through a pandemic. Students have shifted from an online learning environment to maybe an in-class or partially in-class learning environment. So they're not only juggling classes, work, social activities, and just maybe caring for others in their family. Sometimes that extra support, that time to just stop by and check in. I joke that half of my job is being a cheerleader for my students because that's what they need sometimes. And that's what office hours can be for. I provide different times if I have set office hours, and I try to do one kind of morning-ish and one evening-ish if I'm doing 2 office hours for a course. More recently, I've switched to a schedule model. And so I use the tool Calendly, and that allows students to choose times in which to meet with me. I can block out sections for different courses in which they can choose a 20-minute time slot to meet with me. And this allows them more flexibility. It's not just when I'm available at a specific time every week, but it's when they're available. If I have a large assignment that's due, I will offer office hours or student hours in the evening or even on some weekends. And truthfully, I'm working on those times anyway, so it's not much of a change. And it's really, it shows my support for them and whatever situation that they're going through. Okay, I've talked a lot, so I'm interested to hear from you. What do you think about discussion boards? Just you can either unmute or throw it in the chat. What's your gut reaction when you hear the word discussion board? We often use this for interaction with students. Okay, useful tool, graded versus non-graded. Great if done well, just like everything in life. Yeah, it's very true. And they can be very polarizing depending on your experiences or the experiences of your students. And in online classes, we do rely on discussion board or discussion board type things to get that interaction. Video responses, yeah, one of my favorite tools is Flipgrid, which we'll talk about. So exactly, but when you ask students, this is their reaction often. I hate discussion boards because it's very forced, or that it's a one-way interaction, or that maybe we're not the best as faculty creating questions. We tend to focus on answerable, not discussable questions, and that can be really boring. Everyone is answering the same exact way. Another faux pas is lacking instructor or even student presence. How many times have you, I'm in a course right now, this is an online course, and do I go back and look at the responses in which someone put to me? Probably not, right? Not unless I'm told that I have to. Nor sometimes I get a lot of responses, right? And that could just be due to when I post or when others are looking at it. If you look at when your students do discussion boards, they often post and then do their 2 responses about 3 minutes later. And that is not what we're hoping for, right? We want this to be a discussion. So some things to think about. Here's an example, and it might not be the best example, but it was the one that came out of my brain as I was creating this. I often see something when helping faculty create courses of describes the steps to perform whatever within a community. Okay, so stepwise. So they basically, when I think about this, it could be all the same steps for every single student. Maybe their examples are a little bit differently, and they're forced to respond to 2 others. I've tried to look for research that supports why we should respond to 2 others, and there is not much out there on that. I think it's an arbitrary number we pulled out of a hat at one point. So it's interesting that we continue to follow that. What could be better is maybe picking a community. So they have to do a little bit of background research on that community and how they would work with community members to build a needs assessment. So you have to do a little background research. You have to think about capacity building, and then provide information about communities for us to learn about. So pulling in that content. But also, I always like to have students ask a question to other students within a post. So either a clarifying question for others, either something that's your muddiest point, or something you'd like to learn more about. And so by asking a question at the end of a post, that can provide more of a discussion back and forth versus that one-way interaction. Another way is providing choice, right? Providing choice to prompts, multiple different prompts that are getting to the same outcome that you want students to talk about could be another strategy that's utilized. There are many great resources out there to write effective question prompts. This is something that can be elusive, especially if you're in a course and have been using some of these prompts over and over again. Another great tool is Flipgrid, which is totally free, allows students to actually discuss, record those short videos and talk to each other. Having students ask questions to other students, it's a great way to get them talking. So what we can do to make things a little bit less painful for our students and perhaps ourselves is really to create better questions. And there's, like I said, many strategies. I see there's a Google Doc in the chat here to utilize, and that can take time and effort. But interacting often is also key. If your students know that you are going in there multiple times a week, commenting to them or to their groups or about what's going on, that's another great way to make sure there's a little bit more interaction. Personally, I go in Wednesdays and Fridays. My discussion prompts open on Monday. They have to post by Friday, and then they have the weekend to respond, usually to one other student. And I choose one other student because I want that post to be substantive and not just, yes, I really liked what you said, thank you very much, right? And the next one, yes, I liked what you said, thank you very much. But rather having them put their effort into one response. I always provide the rationale of why I'm doing discussion boards. What is the point to them is what I often hear students say. But really, when describing the prompt, I always include why this is relevant to public health professionals or why this is relevant to the profession to discuss and have even some debates on some of the topics or strategies that we use. And it's also great to create opportunities that allow students to go back in and read what others have said. I love discussion boards for peer feedback. I think it's a great way to have students upload content, get some peer feedback, and then revise that content based on that peer feedback. It's a really smooth way. And then it also, I can go in there and look at the content in which the students have posted, look at their peer feedback, and I get to add less feedback because the peers usually cover the majority of it. And so that's another way in which these can be utilized to be a little bit more back and forth versus one way. So I want to hear from you. What have you changed to make discussion boards a little bit more enjoyable for you or your students?
So thank you for calling on me. For discussion boards, well, the one thing that I did do one year was to put them in leadership positions and really give them minimal directions to see, how innovative they could be. And it was quite remarkable what they came up with. It was one of the few times that I heard from them through email, asking questions, outside of the course about their tasks. So yeah, to really, be that sage on the side, and let them run with concepts. So yeah, it was fun, and they did a great job.
Yeah, that's great. I love putting students in a leadership position within those discussion boards or groups and having them do some facilitation, because that's a really important skill for students to take away. Excellent.
Thank you.
Personal feedback to everyone who posts on their first post by Wednesday night. That's awesome that you're able to go in some of those larger courses to give some feedback. I've also heard of other faculty who have students post questions in the discussion board before the next class to talk about, right? And so it's a very gathering information sort of way to have some sort of a formative assessment before walking into a classroom and kind of giving some of those answers. Now that can be really taxing on you if you had a plan, but then there's questions on something else and you have to go back and kind of change what you're planning to talk about. Any other tips or tricks? I like to have students also include a little bit about themselves in some discussion boards of like, why would you do this? Or in what ways does this reflect your personality, your values, something about you, just so you can get to know them a little bit more. I love having students post resources for other students to check out and do some of that digging. Those are excellent ways to make these a little bit more enjoyable for everyone involved. Okay, so another way to kind of insert yourself into an online class, especially an asynchronous class, is to provide video explanations to content. And I think this works really great for any sort of assessment. While I do have written information about an assessment, sometimes what I'm thinking in my brain, students don't translate from the written component. And so what I like to do is provide a little bit of a video that, again, provides that relevance, but also shows an example of an exemplary paper. This is a new class. Sometimes I write some exemplary papers so that the students can see those if I don't have them from previous years, which can be time consuming, or even showing them components that I really care about. My courses, I drive home the importance of references and APA style. And so I always demonstrate, here's how you find these references, here's how you cite things. And then give a little bit of a overview on the rubric. Students sometimes don't know how to read rubrics, especially if they are newer students, freshmen, sophomore. It's not something that we take time to discuss. And so by having a short video that goes through the rubric and talks about the components or the structure in which you care about, I think it just gives students a little bit more insight of what you're looking for. It can reduce the number of email questions that you get and clarifying questions, and overall improve the quality of the work in which you're getting from your students. Okay, so one of the last things to talk about as a tip or trick, Bicronus model is something that's very new. And in fact, it came out last year in an insider ed tech article. And it's really a blend of asynchronous and synchronous learning. Now, some universities have different standards to where if you say it is all asynchronous, you cannot have any synchronous components. Other universities may have a little bit more flexibility in that by choosing like a remote option. But this allows you to have live discussions. And so how this worked in my courses is that I gave students the option of posting on a discussion board or come to a live discussion, and your attendance and participation is what counted for that grade. And I had about half the class come. Those are the students who are really interested in having that oral communication versus that written communication, or students who wanted to get this off their to-do list, or students who learned better with some more communication. So I think this is a really nice option to have in some of your courses. You can also have choice of you come to a live session or you do a comparable assessment on your own time. This works really nice if you're doing some group work or some group interaction where you want to put students in breakout rooms, you want to have them work on some active learning when they're together. But maybe it's more challenging in an asynchronous course, whether with time zones or other obligations. And so a Bicronus model I found to be really, really helpful. Of course, I'm not requiring students to come to this in a remote asynchronous class. I'm providing the option if they want to. And we try to work at a time that works for most students. And so this is something that you have a conversation about in the first week of classes, saying, what times work? Here's a poll. Let's see if we can get the majority of students. In larger courses, I actually had multiple sections in which they could come to during our scheduled class time. And so they could choose to come to the first section, which was a half hour, or the second section, which was a half hour. And that gave students some flexibility, especially if they were running late from something. It's not that they missed it, they just got to go to the next section. And so this is something I really encourage folks to explore and try. Thank you for putting the EDUCAUSE article in there. This is something that really has had very little studies completed on it, but it's very much something that I think is coming down the pipeline at thinking about ways to enhance some of that interaction in online courses. Okay. Other tips, tricks, suggestions, something that I didn't cover, or anything else you want to talk about. I feel like we have a wealth of knowledge in some of these meetings, and it's nice to share some ideas. Yeah, go ahead, Camille.
So I tried my first blog last week on a real-time online with the purpose that student breakout groups would be micro-teaching their peers. And so this was based upon management, and they uploaded visuals so I could see who my visual pictorial students were, videos, definitions, And this also will serve as a resource for them to prepare for assessments. So they really did, and they got to choose which group they wanted to be part of. So it really, I was really quite satisfied with that exercise. And then we did a KWL associated with that. So what did you know coming in? What did you learn? What do you wonder about? And then what did you learn by the end of the class meeting? So I'll do this again. It was very successful.
That's great. Yeah, blogs can be a really powerful tool, and students teaching students, I think, is one of the best ways to really get some interaction, along with creating something that you can use in the future. I love having students create case studies, right? And then I use them the next semester as assessments because they write better case studies than I do. It's awesome. Great. Well, any questions? I want to make sure we have enough time to discuss anything or provide examples or even problem solve for anyone. You guys are great at practicing being my undergraduate students in online courses. Now, I know this time is a tough hour of the day. I encourage anyone who is thinking about implementing some of these strategies to start small, as always, test the waters, see how it works for you, your style, and your students, right? Context matters. Your teaching philosophy matters, and honor where you are and what you want to do. There's no one way, shape, or form in which we should all be teaching besides being really student-centered and acknowledging what's happening around us. So. Okay. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I hope that everyone has a great rest of their time change week, and that you are surviving this. And we are in week 11, so it's definitely a challenging time of the semester. So I appreciate your attention and for coming to this presentation. And always happy, feel free to reach out if you have any questions in the future.
Thanks very much, Jessica, and thanks to everyone who participated in today's webinar, and for everyone who shared their thoughts and questions and expertise. The session recording and the slides will be uploaded to the playlist on the registration site. Our next session is going to begin tomorrow at 11 a.m. And so for the schedule of the events, you can go to the events air page, and I'll just grab the link and pop it in the chat for everyone. And here it is. And then we really would appreciate your feedback. And so if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on the survey, we would really appreciate that. And then you should also check out any additional sessions that are happening on the USDLA website. And we hope to see you again at another one of our events. And I'll pop the link to the USDLA stuff in the chat as well. Thanks again to Jessica and to everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your day.